It is claimed Clare's third-level students will be left high and dry if the government fails to implement planned cuts to college fees. Higher Education Minister James Lawless has stated a planned further €500 cut to the voluntary student contribution fee in Budget 2027 could be scrapped due to overspends. The current contribution fee is €2,500, and the coalition had signalled its intention to reduce this to €2,000 next year, but claims it would cost $50 million to do so. Sinn Féin spokesperson for further and higher education and Clare TD Donna McGettigan believes the government is out of touch.
So this indication has come from last week. We were talking to Minister Lawless in committee, and he mentioned that the Department of Education are looking for levies from other departments because of the overspending there, and that it may have to come from it may have to come from his own department. So the talking of the fees then come up. So this is very, very concerning then, and I mean it would be utterly unacceptable for the government to scrap the promised cut to college fees.
Simon Harris previously stated that he wants to see student fees phased out eventually. I think it's going back down to 2,000, but would you have confidence that we will see an abolishment of student fees within the lifetime of this government?
No, and it was one of the general election, as you say, Fine Gael promised to abolish student fees. Minister Lawless himself recently said he would be winding down student fees over the lifetime of this government. Now we're hearing this, and he actually said in committee that no, they won't be abolishing. It's not in the programme for government. So all these signs are concerning. Whenever you talk about the college fees, that wasn't really a cut. So first year and second year and third year students only ever knew €2,000. So it actually went up to 2,500. So even then, that was a slap in the face to
and to be fair, it had been €3,000 before that. So look, while that may be, as you've described, why that may be seen by some as a slap in the face, there was years of a payment of €3,000 and an expectancy of €3,000.
Yeah, and I mean, it's just showing how out of touch they are, that they're going to go near and even not even go with the cuts for the student fees. I mean, families are already struggling to get by. We heard from students last week in the Housing Committee that talked about some of them having to buy packets of biscuits the last days or very, very cheap noodles the last days. So not only is these student fees and uncertainty around them, they're affecting students' mental health as well as their health. And it would be outrageous for them for the government to abandon them at a time like this, especially in the time of cost of living crisis.
Education Minister James Lawless, or I should say further and higher Education Minister James Lawless, has ultimately said that it is something they're examining, but it is too early to say what exactly will get cut from the budget. So look, we do have that asterisk there that they're considering cutting the student contribution reductions from Budget 2027, but we don't have clarification or certainty on that. What do you think would Sinn Féin do if they were presented with the same situation?
I don't think cuts are the way to go. We have a massive surplus. We've seen that, and we should be cutting into that surplus. Why should one department or other departments suffer because of the incompetence and overrunning of spending of another department? Otherwise, all departments could start overrunning, and where do we stand then? So it can't be. Cuts to other services are not the way to go. We're quite willing to give the likes of McDonald's VAT reductions and big corporate landlords VAT reductions. Surely the ones that are suffering the most are those on the ground, like students, like vulnerable and elderly, that they should be looked at first before anything else.
And that was Sinn Féin and Clare TD Donna McGettigan, her party spokesperson for further and higher education, speaking with our own Darragh Dolan. And to discuss more on this, I'm joined now on the line by Sean De Búrca, the University of Galway Student President-elect and current Vice President and Education Officer. And also with us is the incoming TUS Student President and Vice President for Education and Welfare at their Ennis campus, Emma Hogan. And you're both very welcome to the programme. And Sean, how disappointing is this, or how disappointed are students, indeed yourself, given the government had previously committed to reducing fees each year, although Minister Lawless has said it's too soon to say if he would cut fees in October's budget?
Well, without a doubt, it's incredibly disappointing for students. For when you look at the housing situation, it's very easy to look down the line and say that things are going to continuously get worse. The hope was that at least with fees, things might get better. And what we're being told now is that actually that hope, we shouldn't have had it. What we consistently keep seeing is that students are treated as an accessory to society instead of a part of society. And the local community is worse off because of it. You go back to when we had 10,000 students instead of 20,000 here in the University of Galway. And you could walk into town and town would be buzzing throughout the day. The local businesses were thriving. Now what you see is that students have to spend more and more time working because they're struggling to afford their rent. They're struggling to pay for their fees. They're struggling with the just general cost of living. And even though we've twice as many students, town is dead. So our local businesses are suffering there. Our local community, that level of cohesion is suffering. And this is one way that the government could come in. And by cutting fees, it's something uniform that they could do to free up that bit of money that will be supporting those communities. They'll be supporting students. They'll be supporting ordinary people on the ground. And instead, they're not doing it.
Yeah, and Emma, just to bring you in, I mean, you heard what Sean has had to say, and Donna McGettigan mentioning students, anecdotes of students having to buy things like noodles to make them last for days because they can't afford, they really have to watch their money in terms of food and so on. I mean, what are you hearing from students? Are they already struggling to afford college costs, and are they at their wits' end when they hear this news that these planned cuts may not happen come budget 2027?
Oh, absolutely. That's the case anyway. With the students that I'm seeing, we have a food bank in TUS Students Union, which students will avail of if they can't, struggling to afford to pay for food and things. And that's getting a lot of use between cost of accommodation, utilities and things like that. And then, of course, the students who aren't in accommodation got hit recently with the whole increase in fuel prices. So really, it's just another instance of students being used as a punching bag to kind of fill in gaps in the government. And it's really not fair just seeing this happen to students. I was lucky enough myself that majority of the time I was in college, I was paying the reduced fee. So it's incredibly disheartening now to see students coming through and just being told again and again, no, that's not the case. We're not going to cut it as promised. And even though the Minister has said that it's too early to say yet, students are making the decision whether they'll continue their path through college based on if they can afford it or not. And that's really just inconsiderate and disheartening to hear that it's kind of a decision that's being kicked down the road and students are being affected by it majorly.
Yeah, I mean, Sean, Darragh did mention to Donna McGettigan that, look, at one stage, as we all know, the contribution fee was €3,000, so it has come down. However, that reduction in last year's budget was supposed to be €1,500. That was scaled back to €500. Has that move already affected trust among students?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when the government, what they did last year was they did increase fees by €500 compared to the year before, and they managed to spin it as a reduction in costs. I'm sure the government spin doctors were really earning their Christmas bonus that week. But the level of trust that students have in the government right now simply doesn't exist. We look at the National Student Accommodation Strategy, and it is incredibly lacklustre. It's essentially promising that things won't get any better, and that's if they manage to meet their targets. We were led to believe that the cost of college fees was going to be reduced. That's not going to happen. And what we saw, if you look throughout the period of 2011 to 2021, according to the Department of Higher Education's own figures, the cost of living for the general population went up by 3%, but for students it went up by 25%. At the same time, the SUSI maintenance grants went up by 0% in that period. So we're way behind in the terms of in just the levels of support that we need to have, and it is impacting people's academics. Like, I know one person who was in my course. He's from Clare Castle, just outside Ennis there, and he was commuting for his final year, which meant if he had a lecture in the morning and a lecture in the late afternoon, he'd only go to one so that he could go back and could work for the day. So obviously that's going to have an impact. But he's just one example. There's people commuting from as far as Kerry, Donegal to Galway every day, and it's not sustainable.
Yeah, I mean those kind of commutes, Sean. By the time a student gets to college, they're probably wrecked already, and they're not in the best mindset to be soaking up important information.
Absolutely. You come onto campus here any morning at 7:30 and you can walk around the car parks and you'll see people sleeping in their cars. The only car parks where you don't see that is, of course, the staff car parks.
Okay. Emma, this is happening because Minister Lawless, he did say in a recent parliamentary response that basically an overspend of the Department of Education could be what limits his ambitions. We know last month government departments were asked to contribute a levy to provide an additional 646 million to the Department of Education due to a deficit. How concerned are you that students are being asked to bear the cost of overspending in the department?
Oh, it's just incredibly disappointing to see that it is being put on students again. Like, these are the young people who are entering the working world and have to deal with the cost of living crisis on top of all of this. And students aren't the people who can afford this. Just to put it bluntly, like, these are not the people who will be able to sort out this problem. Like, they're working more than years before them have had to work in college, and even at that, they're still struggling. Like, it's just incredibly disappointing to see day-to-day students go into the office just completely shattered from having to work and to commute. And like Sean was saying, they can't put their mind into their college career because of all this extra stuff going on they're doing just to afford to get in the door of the college. It's ridiculous.
Sean, Minister Lawless has said it's too early to say, but obviously in this situation at the moment where every other department has to contribute to a levy to support the Department of Education, that places additional challenges for all of our spending plans. So basically, look, he's saying it's too early at the moment to know what will happen. Do you and students accept that, or do they need more certainty now?
No, I mean, I think it's a totally ridiculous premise for a start that we're one of, if not the richest countries in the world, depending on how you count it. And at the same time, the notion that we can't have a free education, it doesn't stack up when you look at the other countries in Europe where education, third level education, is much cheaper or in some cases free. And yet here we are having students and their parents being expected to fork out $2,500. It's totally ridiculous. And of course, for those students and in many cases it is parents are going to be struggling to figure out how much do they actually have to budget for, how much are they going to be needing to fork out when it comes the time to pay the fees. It's putting an undue level of stress on students, on their families, and this sort of playing games between the department's own budgets. I don't understand the politics of it, but I do understand what's happening on the ground, and it is incredibly detrimental to people's mental well-being, to people's financial well-being, and to people's ability to focus on just where they're going in their college.
Yeah, and I mean, as Sean has touched on, many students will have to turn to the bank of mom and dad in situations to help them go to college, but not everyone's parents are in that position. Do you think this country is becoming less accessible for students, particularly from lower income backgrounds? That third level is going to be cut off to them. It won't be a viable option going forward.
Absolutely. Like, I think, unfortunately, that is the case, that it is coming down to students to depend on that. And that's not the majority of cases we see with students. Not everyone has that form of support behind them. Not only that, but there are, like, even cases of students I've encountered recently. There's a student who, she's trying to fund her own college journey and for two of her children as well. So that's, like, she's doing 3 rounds of fees. And And then there's students who are getting the grant for Susie, and the criteria for that is kind of finicky to fit into anyway. So it really is going to be an issue for students who don't have that sort of family structure to depend on, which is incredibly worrying.
I mean, Sean, look, we'll wait to see what happens in October's budget, but given, as we mentioned earlier on, last year, budget 2026 was meant to see a €1,500 reduction in fees. That was scaled back to 500, so that the amount went from $3,000 to 2,500. But as you say, there was criticism because the previous year's fees had been 2,000 because of cost of living supports. Do you feel like this is a fait accompli, that commenting on this from the Minister, albeit it's a parliamentary response, but is it laying the groundwork, do you feel, to get people ready for the inevitable?
I worry that is the case. Sort of getting people used to bad news seems to be the general communication strategy of the government. And when it comes to students, we're very used to bad news at this stage, because you look at the likes of the maintenance grants, they're way behind where they need to be. You look at the level of support for building housing, providing housing, and having it be affordable, it's way behind where it needs to be. And now, of course, the simple front cost of college fees is way behind where it needs to be.
So if, as the Minister is suggesting, the funding is limited, then what should be the priority, Sean? Should it be fee reductions, grants, or other forms of supports for students?
Well, I wouldn't really accept that premise when you're looking at a massive budget surplus. I appreciate that for the Minister himself, his budget is going to be limited, but for the government as a whole, we have a significant surplus. We have a very good debt rating so that if the government wanted to go into more debt, we'd be able to get it at close to zero interest. I don't accept the premise that there isn't enough money to go around at a time when there actually has never been so much money to go around, especially when education fundamentally is an investment. It's not a simple cost, more so that when people are educated, they will, as a result, earn more. They will produce more. The country is better off as a whole just through the tax receipts. It will pay for itself many times over. So I wouldn't accept the premise that there's that limited amount of money and that something needs to be cut.
If you don't accept the premise, then I presumably you wouldn't accept any sort of form of argument from the government that we've seen with, and particularly in the energy situation and the fuel protest, that budget surpluses are not. We don't know how long events in the Middle East are going to rumble on for, and that they may continually for some time have to be offering supports. And we've already seen unions and so on coming to them looking for more money, that they have to spread it far and wide.
Well, I suppose my background with my degree is in economics, so I take a lot of interest in it. And I would say that when you're looking at fuel, the cost of that, it is something which is also affecting students a lot, because we're seeing more and more students commuting, and we're getting towards a point where students can't afford to live near their campus, but they also, as things are continuing, won't be able to afford to commute to their campus either. So there does need to be supports there in terms of fuel, and that does need to be targeted. But fundamentally, it will end up being temporary. I don't see why that's something which it would be considered to be an incredibly long-term problem. It might take a couple of years, but the country is in a good enough position to be able to deal with that.
Okay, I mean, what do you think can and should be done? What would you propose to reduce the financial burden on students?
Well, I mean, ideally it would be to completely abolish the fees, but that's been something that I think we've been trained to not hope for now. That kind of seems like it's a pipe dream, and like you mentioned, that we're being trained to hear bad news constantly. So I mean, step one, don't increase the fees by 500. Other than that, it's just it's incredibly disheartening, and I feel like students have just lost a lot of faith in the government, and you can see that they're absolutely drained from having to constantly be told one thing after the other.
Yeah, and just to finish with you, Sean, given as Emma says students are absolutely drained, I mean, if, as expected, we don't see these planned cuts in October, what will the response from students be? Will there be protests or campaigns if the fee cuts don't go ahead, or are students just so worn out, maybe they feel that they either don't have the energy for that, or else they feel that it won't glean the desired action or response if they were to protest?
Well, I suppose that's going to come from a wider conversation that we'll be having within the student movement nationally. But I can certainly see why the government is looking at students as an easy one to kick down, because it's happened for so long that students have gotten to a place where something better is almost unimaginable. The notion of being able to protest and achieve something when students have been mistreated and continuously used as essentially a cash cow, it's something where I suppose the question would be, what will we achieve? And so many believe that things can't be achieved. Well, that isn't true. We look at how the government is responding in terms of housing, in terms of fuel costs for students, and now, of course, college fees. And we've seen those consistent failures. Even though when you look at it, it's quite obvious that there is alternatives out there. I suppose just to go on about housing very briefly, the National Accommodation Strategy that the department put out has described that the state providing the number of student beds that they predict are going to be required, they've described that for the state as untenable, so that instead of people paying maybe more in taxes in a way that is equitable, where those who have more pay more, what people are going to be doing is they're going to be paying massive rents to probably a Canadian pension fund. So people are going to be worse off with the current government's response to the cost of living for students.
Okay, we do have to leave that one there, but I've no doubt we'll be speaking about it again quite soon. My thanks to Sean De Búrca, the University of Galway Student President-elect, current Vice President and Education Officer, and the incoming TUS Student President and Vice President for the Education and Welfare at their Ennis campus, Emma Hogan.